Japan, the newspaper history in Japan, like the first newspaper started here in the United States in 1690, and then, well, I mean, it wasn't the United States, or whatever, like, in North America. And then they didn't start in Japan until 1862. So when the Japanese newspapers formed, so did the Kisha Clubs. Well, it actually came a little later. It came in 1890, which I know I haven't explained Kisha Clubs yet, but I'm getting to it. Okay, so first to keep on the newspaper thing, it's the most prominent media outlet in Japan today. I don't know how many of you can actually see this, but the top 5 newspapers are the Yomiuri Shimbun, Asahi Shimbun, Mainichi Shimbun, the Nihon Keizai Shimbun, and the Sankei Shimbun. Okay, so like this accounts for over 50% of the circulation. So like a lot of people are getting like the same newspapers, which is kind of important to tell you later. So the Yomiuri Shimbun is the most read paper. It's got, like it says, 10,000 copies per day. So the way to compare it to the United States is that you know, like they have 10 million copies a day. The USA Today is like the, you know, they've got their circulation is the largest in the United States, and it's, you know, under 2.5 million. So, anyway, so, which I guess, yeah, okay. So then, and then I've got some stats from 1999. As to how many people read the newspapers, puts it more into perspective. 85.4% of men read newspaper each day, and 75% of women in Japan. However, in the United States, in 2004, which I know that it's different years, but just over 50% of adults in the U.S. read a paper in a week, so versus a day. So anyway, I'm just setting up to show you like how important, I guess, like the newspaper is in Japan. Like a lot of people get their information from newspapers. I mean, they get them from other sources as well, but it's like a very prominent news outlet. So anyway, okay, so now to the Kisha Clubs. They're formed in 1890, like it says here. And so what they do basically is like a journalist, you know, gets on to, you know, the Asahi Shimbun. And so then they go out for their stories. Well, you can't just like go out and report on whatever you want. Like, a journalist is placed into what's called a Kisha Club, and then the Kisha Clubs hold, like, they're like the go-between, I think I've got that in here somewhere, but okay. They're the go-between the people and the government. So, like, they, or the media, you know, and the government. And so, like, you know, they say, you know, we're going to have a press conference about something going on with the Prime Minister today, like postal reform or something like that. And then they go get their stories from, you know, from that press conference. So like every newspaper is getting all their information from the same news conference. So, which if you think about the United States, maybe you'd have like an event happen and you have like, you know, different newspapers and TV stations like all going to, you know, this event. They can get like different angles, they can go talk to different people, they can get like, you know, a bunch of different opinions from many sources, whereas the Kisha Club is one source. So, which I think is problematic, because like with the newspapers being like such a prominent like media outlet, like I think that with them all coming from the same source, that they can kind of sway public opinion the way that they want to, and I'll get to that later. A book that you can check out at the library is Closing the Shop by Lori Ann Freeman. And it's this book, and it's excellent, and it talks about, she labels the Kisha Clubs as information cartels for kind of the reasons that I've been talking about a little bit, like that they all get, you know, their information from the same source and stuff. And then on page 8, so towards the beginning of this book, you can really get a good idea of how, like, influential the media is, because they have this scale of influence listed on here, and so they like took like a poll, and like businesses, farmers, laborers, bureaucrats, intellectuals, everybody rated like each other on who, like how influential they are. So every single person, or every single different like entity, and I'll pass this around, puts the media at the most influential status, except for the media. And they list bureaucrats just about themselves. So if you want, you can look at that. Let's see. So anyway, like I said, they set up press conferences, and that's where the journalists get their stories. So all information is coming from the same source. And so that, in a way, can cause a lack of investigative reporting, because if you think about in the United States, people can like take different angles, and they can be the first ones to crack a story, you know. And so you've got this competition that kind of drives people like out-fact each other. So this is something I'll read out loud. I was going to have it on the big screen, but this guy, Tom Brislin, writes, while Western styles of journalism would see truth emerging from full disclosure reports from highly competitive independent journalists and news agencies trying to out-fact each other to be the first of exclusive stories, the Kisha system effectively strips the competitiveness from the journalistic practice, reducing independence of the journalist and the level of truthful disclosure in their reports. So anyway, so some people think then that that can be a problem because you can have just a single point of view, but others argue that it actually causes, like, you actually get diversity, but it's like really polarized diversity. So is everybody following me? Because I'm like talking really, really fast to try to squeeze everything in.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. Is it okay if I butt in with a question?
Oh yeah, that's cool.
So like,
that way.
who actually runs these like Kisha Clubs? Are they, you know, are they government run, or is it like sort of a
No.
halfway sort of entity, or like what? Who's the boss of them?
Ooh.
You know?
Well, we'll kind of get to that later, but the like essentially like the, gosh, that's a really good question. I mean the government, like. The Kisha Clubs like formed, and so they're like an entity of the newspaper, I gather from reading the book.
association.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so like that means that you have to be like a member of it to get any kind of story. So I guess it's a separate entity from both,
Okay.
but like you can't not go through them. If, you know, does that make sense? Does that answer your question again?
Sort of, kind of.
So
There's a Screen Actors Guild you have to be a member of to participate in some films or things like that, right? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And so if you're not in the Screen Actors Guild, you can't, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, it's a government organization or that it's a, you know, it's a separate, it's a professional organization or, you know, union in that case, but
it is like heavily influenced by the government, which I'll kind of touch on in a little bit, but yeah, so yeah, that was a really good example.
I have a really poor, probably dumb question.
No,
but,
dumb question.
Oh, if it's not dumb, I can't.
No,
I'm sorry.
No,
I mean, so Asahi,
Uh-huh.
is that the same as the beer company there?
I wondered that too.
The name,
Yeah.
the name and the kanji are the same, but I don't know, I mean,
I didn't investigate that, but
Because if
that's a
they're
good
all
question.
connected,
I don't know.
Then they can-
Anybody know those?
Does anybody
Big
know?
corporate histories?
Okay, no, I don't know, I'm sorry, but I can look into it and post it on the blog.
my other question was, so in Japan, do they have like freedom of press the way that they have here? Like here, the media can kind of say whatever they want, or is it just all the Kisha? I don't know exactly.
Oh, okay. Like well, actually, how about I go a little further and then we'll see if we still have that question. Is that cool?
All right, that's fine.
Okay, but remember it because I'll forget it.
All right, I'll do my best.
So like, I think we're at a point like where everybody's getting like all their information from kind of like the same source because everything's filtered through the Kisha Club. So, which I'll have examples like in a little bit because I know it's kind of like a lot of information. But so the diversity assumption, okay, so you have all the information coming from one source. So some people say, which maybe I skipped that one, I did. Oh no, I didn't. Okay. So, like some people think, well, it's all coming from the same source, you're going to get the same point of view in like every newspaper, which some people argue that it actually polarizes people into like kind of like anti-government, pro-government, if you're looking at like the government aspect of it. which that's what I looked at, I guess I should pretext, because when I originally did research on this, I was looking into how the newspapers presented the proposed changes to Article 9, which is like the peace article in the Japanese Constitution. U.S. and Japanese Constitution. Anyway, so this diversity assumption, so it applies like kind of to the government, like whether a newspaper is pro-government or anti-government. So this guy, Kizo Nanri, says that the journalists and former journalists, claim that Japanese newspapers and thus their editorials are polarized into two groups, anti-government, anti-U.S. Asahi group, and the pro-government, pro-U.S. Yomiuri group. So, which is funny because, like, well, I'll get into that later. But, so, like, Asahi is like, has been linked with, like, anti-government, anti-U.S. sentiment. And, yeah. Oh, were you asking a question?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. So whether or not it's a single point or the diversity assumption, this Kizo Nanri guy says that there isn't a conclusive answer because unfortunately the assumptions haven't been substantiated by a linguistic analysis.
Thank you.
So that still needs to be done. However, this other book by Feldman states that the Asahi is the most critical of the government, and then it goes in order of the Mainichi, the Yomiuri, the Nihon Keizai, and the Sankei, which is interesting because Hoshino Tomoyuki, that was here, he worked for the Sankei for 3 years, and he said that it was interesting because like they are kind of like more like rightists and stuff. And he said that like he knew these journalists at the beginning and they were kind of had their own opinions and everything, but by the end when he left, like all of them said that they were like they agreed with all of the rightist views and that they had always felt that way. So that was really interesting how their opinions changed so much. Anyway, and so like it says here, the latter two, so the Sankei and the Nihon Keizai, are regarded as having pro-government attitude, which I found like in relation to the Article 9 stuff, but I won't get into that because that takes too much time. So then it's like, okay, so if these papers are only presenting, you know, one opinion or a polarized opinion of what's going on, or then are they serving the public or the state interest? I think they serve the public or the state interest more after reading Closing the Shop and A Public Betrayed. A Public Betrayed is like an awesome book that you should definitely pick up. It's got way more information than I could ever hear about, like different things that have gone on in the U.S., Japan, and other countries, and how the newspapers, like the journalists have treated people and other stuff. How am I going on time? Am I like, okay. So I don't think that they neglect the public interest, but that they serve the state over the people because of retaliation from the government. Like there can be very harsh retaliation, such as like if the Kisha Club says that, okay, you can report on this and you can report it a certain way, because sometimes they have those regulations too. Like then if the paper goes against it, the government issues the licensing for the companies, for the like Asahi Shimbun and stuff. So if they don't agree with the way it's being presented, they can like appeal to get the licensing either revoked or only renewed for a year instead of the standard 5 years, which did happen to the Asahi fairly recently. So I'll just read this because it's way too small to see. Okay, so from Part of the Public Betrayed, which is by Adam Campbell and oh my goodness, I can't remember the other guy's name, Wasnabi. Anyway, because the central government issues broadcasting licenses, as I was talking about, on a renewable basis, the ruling party holds a lethal weapon over the broadcasters and therefore against the newspapers too. So, for example, in 1993, the Liberal Democratic Party lost power for the first time since the party's founding in 1955. The news division director of TV Asahi made a statement that almost cost the company its license. The director at the time, Tsubaki, bragged at a meeting of the National Association of Private Broadcasters of Japan that TV Asahi's negative coverage of the LDP was responsible for the LDP's landmark loss, like super dangerous comment. As a result, when the LDP regained power, only 9 months later, the president of TV Asahi was summoned before the Diet, where LDP politicians reprimanded him before the nation, a standard Japanese parliamentarian move to humiliate individuals. The LDP further underscored Asahi's tenuous position by saying that the company's license was renewed for only 1 year rather than the standard 5 years. The message from the LDP to the news media was clear. Japanese newspapers and broadcasters who do not report the news in a manner acceptable to the ruling government jeopardize their very existence. That's a quote from the book. I obviously did not come up with that. So anyway, so that's the, the author's opinions of this book, which I agree with. Asahi News, so like the issues and questions that I thought of like after reading that were that, and it was a little bit longer, like talking about how, how they lost the power and stuff just by saying certain things. Anyway, some issues would be like the Asahi News has such an influence on the public that it could shape the face of politics. Like that's kind of scary because it's just one entity like swaying the public's opinion so much. The government sees this as a potential threat and to their rule and can punish the news corporation for not presenting issues the way that they see fit. So what if there's a story that reflects poorly on the government and it is in the public's best interest to report it? Would the media outlet do it and risk losing their license? How many activities go on like this that are unreported? Unfortunately, I don't have all the answers to these questions, but something to think about, like when you're reading the newspaper and stuff. Anyway, these are a few of the news pieces that took a while to get out to the public. Former Prime Minister Tanaka and the Lockheed scandal. What happened was Lockheed paid the Prime Minister, let me look, I think it's $2 million in bribes to pave the way for Japanese sales of Lockheed planes in Japan. The scandal didn't break out until a couple years after it happened, so like they just sat on it. And like they pretty much had to because of the regulations of the Kisha Clubs. There were also a couple of like these two scandals actually involved the press. The Recruit and Stock for Favor scandal was in 1988, and 3 of Japan's news organizations were implicated in the scandal and forced to resign. In 1990, a Loans for Favor scandal included the defendant paying a collaborator in the Keizai Shimbun, which is actually Japan's Wall Street Journal, and another weekly magazine to write favorable stories about the scandal tainted company. So like this company